Welcome and thanks for joining us for Two Steps Forward, our daily Bible study. I'm James. This is we are up to episode 295 and 1 Peter chapter 2. So second day on the letter of 1 Peter. We said it has themes of persecution and suffering. It has themes of courage as exiles and pilgrims in this world, which we're going to get into a little bit more today. And it has the themes of looking forward to the hope we have for the future life in Christ. So if you haven't had a chance to read through 1 Peter 2 yet, go ahead and do that right now. Pause. But here's my personal paraphrase. Peter tells his readers to get rid of all sinful talk in their lives. This is a continuation of the kind of like be holy section from chapter 1. Specifically mentions deceit, slander, hypocrisy. Instead, just consume good spiritual words so that you can grow up in your faith as Christians. Peter refers to Jesus as a living stone in the temple of God and says that all believers, like living stones, are being put together into this temple. Their lives offer spiritual sacrifices, and God's Spirit dwells there. Peter then quotes from a couple different Old Testament places, Isaiah 28, Psalm 118, and Isaiah 8 as the basis for this living stone analogy. He was chosen by God, rejected by the people. These readers, however, have received the gospel, are a chosen people, and a royal priesthood meant to declare the praises of God. Therefore, as foreigners to this world, Peter tells believers to abstain from hyper-worldly desires, obsessions with this world, which are at war with our souls. Instead, believers should live in such a way that even the pagans recognize their objective goodness in their lives and may try to accuse the Christians of doing wrong, but nonetheless see the beauty of a life aimed at the glory of God. Believers should submit to earthly authorities, and God uses these authorities, he says, in general, to punish wrongdoers. Within these boundaries, believers should live freely, but still in submission to God's will and with respect to all people. Peter addresses slaves here. He says, very similar to employees, they should submit themselves to their bosses, even harsh bosses. As witnessed with Christ, no earthly authority is perfect, but our godliness shows particularly when we are nonetheless godly in the face of oppression. Jesus not only faced earthly injustice, but bore our sins so that we might die to sin and live for righteousness. And having been reconciled to the flock of God and to God, we should live in line with our good shepherd. That's 1 Peter 2. Mm-hmm. Devotional thought number 1. All God's people are now the royal priesthood. So maybe the most famous verse in this, at least the one that I've heard most quoted from 1 Peter 2, is the royal priesthood comment. God's people are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God. In the Old Testament, remember, this is a wild thing for New Testament believers to hear, because in the Old Testament, you had a priesthood. In the New Testament, the people are a priesthood. What that means moving forward, see, in the Old Testament, the priests were the only ones who made sacrifices. They were the only ones that got to do certain work at the temple, with the Levites. But in the New Testament, this means that we're supposed to live our lives as though we were priests at the temple. Now, what exactly does that mean? We're supposed to offer spiritual sacrifices. We don't have animal sacrifices anymore because all those animal sacrifices, those blood sacrifices, just pointed to head to Jesus, and he was the last, the greatest, the final sacrifice. But it doesn't mean that we stop sacrificing. It just means that our sacrifices change. We offer spiritual sacrifices. What are spiritual sacrifices? The New Testament gives us a lot of examples of this, too. Romans 12 is probably the most famous spot. It says, offer your lives as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. But there are other things too. We offer good works as good works that we do for others. Those are sacrifices to God. Praise on our lips, Hebrews talks about. That is a sacrifice to God. The money that we share with other people for the spread of the gospel and for those in need, that is a sacrifice that we make as New Testament believers to God. Romans 15 actually sort of talks about the people that we win for Christ by the sacrifices we make in life, in sharing the gospel with them and in winning them to Christ. That is a sacrifice to God. So while in the Old Testament there was a level of like logistical authority. So there was a high priest, and there were other priests, and there were Levites, and there was a level of like hierarchy. But nonetheless, the idea is there shouldn't be any clergy domination in the New Testament for spiritual tasks, which is, I think, what we tend to slip into today at times. At least a lot of churches. That only, like only those who have gone through seminary training, only those who, in our church, but I think learn original languages. They're the only ones qualified to do the spiritual tasks of evangelism and Bible study, and that's just not true. We're all part of the priesthood of God.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. So I think the more people are involved in like a robust growth group ministry, the more they will start to realize that they don't need nor want. So like if I was in the hospital, sometimes it like blows my mind. If I was in the hospital, the last person I would want to come see me is like my pastor. Like
Except that he's your husband.
Well, yeah, it's like you're in a vulnerable position. You
Message
look your
taken.
worst.
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah,
saying
yeah.
like you have to look your best for your pastor, but
Well, yeah, there is a level of vulnerability attached to it. You're right.
yeah, and I don't know, like what are you gonna do for me that someone
A
else
fellow believer can't do. Yeah.
couldn't, right? So it's always surprising to me when people like, especially maybe because I just know you so well, when people like want you to visit them in the hospital. I'm like, do they know you? Like, you hate hospitals, you hate germs, you also are not like the most compassionate
Right,
person.
Yeah, that's not my biggest
You have your own
gift.
gifts,
Yeah.
but that's not. Yeah, so I'm like, what? Why do they want you to come?
Yeah. So, there is an element when we studied James.
Sometimes I try to go visit them if I'm already at the hospital.
Right. And quite honestly,
It's called a pop-in. I'm sure people really appreciate it.
there are people who are really good at it. So, like, why not let them, just like there are some people who are good at preaching and other people who wouldn't be, why not play to, like, the gifts of the body?
But when you are in a healthy small group, community group, growth group, whatever you want to call them, you build your own community there.
They take care of one another.
So I would much rather have someone from my growth group come visit me and pray with me in the hospital who knows I've already been vulnerable with, who knows my struggles and my fears and has been in my home and eaten my food that I think I cook that is good and is really not,
This chokes down my food.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so it's so organic, and in those elements, you usually do kind of play to people's strengths. Like the people who are good at meal or like to do meal prep will bring a meal to a family when there's tragedy or sickness or whatever. The people who are gifted with some financial abundance will help pay for rent or car fix, car improvements or whatever. Like it happens really organically when you just say like, yes, we need the elders or the clergy to do it. It's number one, they're not necessarily gifted in all those ways. Number two, it deprives God's people of doing the things they are gifted to do, which makes for a very immature congregation. I don't want to completely discount. So what I was mentioning is in the book of James, there is the idea that so it says if you're sick, have the elders come over and pray over you with oil and stuff like that. What exactly that means. It doesn't necessarily mean formal clergy though, necessarily. Spiritually mature people who are comfortable leading prayer, I think is probably what you're looking at there. But I think once you get down, if you really dig down into the issue of what can a pastor do that other members can't do. I'm not trying to get into the realm of should we even have pastors, because I think very early in the New Testament church, you clearly do see that there are people appointed as elders, leaders, pastoral figures in the church. Almost every church that Paul plants, he eventually sets up one of his ministry trainees as like the leader of that church. So like there is a level of that, but it's not that they just do all the spiritual tasking. It's that everybody needs some level of organization, administration, and leadership. And that's what your spiritual leader does. It doesn't mean they do all the spiritual tasks. If every prayer in your church is being said only by the pastor, you have a dead church. what the pastor needs to do is not show up at every gathering to pray for everybody. He needs to be coaching people to be able to pray in those moments throughout life so that they can actually be, like, for instance, witnesses and pray with other people too. That kind of thing. It's the discipleship process that I think it's neither good for the pastor nor for the congregation. We're a universal priesthood.
Well, it's kind of like I am what's called a mid-level provider. Some people don't like this term, but this is where nurse anesthetists and nurse practitioners, physician's assistants fall into this mid-level.
Okay.
Nurse anesthetists are a little different because in a lot of rural areas, we work independently without anesthesiologists, but I'm part of a care team model in which we work together with anesthesiologists, and you see this more in urban settings. And so there'll be one anesthesiologist for 4 ORs, and there's a nurse anesthetist in each OR. So your nurse anesthetist does all the heavy lifting. I put the patient to sleep, I wake the patient up, I'm with the patient the entire time.
Yeah.
But I have an anesthesiologist there, and they're paid to be there for their experience, for their expertise, and yes, for their leadership.
Yeah.
Like if I have questions about something or even want to bounce an idea off of someone, they're there for guidance. They're not there to tell me what to do. And they don't want to necessarily tell me what to do unless it's something that they, if it was something unsafe or
they
whatever.
Oversee, like an
They
elder.
oversee, yes. So, they're just there, yes, providing a certain amount of leadership and safeguard, and I like practicing that way because my patients are very sick patients at the place I practice. They have a lot of different health issues. We do very complex surgeries. So I think it's nice to work in a care team model like that and have an extra set of hands, an extra brain, extra help.
Not to mention the fact that, you haven't been doing it for that long.
Right.
That to have somebody with additional experience overseeing that and kind of coaching you along is beneficial. There might come a time in the future where you're like, well, I don't need that quite as much. And that's a good model of discipleship.
But it's I think the same like a pastor. I'm the one doing the home visits and communing people and.
Well, let me push that because it's a really good analogy.
Thank you.
Let me push it a little bit harder though. If the surgeries could only be performed by the anesthesiologists, how many more people would die?
There would. I don't think people realize this. The amount of surgeries that would be able to be performed would be
minuscule. Yeah. So that's
both cost-wise, it couldn't be afforded to pay an anesthesiologist to do every single procedure, and also there just aren't enough.
So this is my point: is if the pastor is the bottleneck that has to do all the evangelism, all the care and visitation, all of the prayers, all of the teaching in every group possibly thing. You're going to have people spiritually dying because you're not utilizing the gifts that are out there and you're just numerically unable to reach as many people.
Yeah. I had a colleague the other day who told me he went to see a patient before her surgery and he said, I'm the nurse anesthetist, I'll do your anesthesia for the procedure. And she said, oh, I don't qualify for an anesthesiologist. And he said, no one in this hospital does. He said, no one in this hospital has an anesthesiologist doing their
they oversee.
It's not their job. We're trained to do it, and also you can't afford it. This is how it's set up to work.
So this is the thing, and you have to be disciplined about this too, because there are times where, for instance, members might get offended.
Yeah.
If it's why don't I get the pastor doing this? And what I would say at that moment is you want a different model of a church.
Exactly.
You want a church of 60 people.
Yep.
Where a pastor kind of does everything for everyone. If you're in a church of more than several hundred members, and so our church technically our membership is somewhere around 100, 1,000. One person, that's not going to work. So you can't shrink the body down into your own specific model of ministry. If you really want that model, you have to go to a smaller, rural church. But a lot of people, when they grow up in that, for instance, that's their only framework of thinking, and they're like, well, I just, and so it's why churches have to have kind of a common a lot of grace towards one another, but a common philosophy of ministry too. Devotional thought number 2, exiles in the world. So it's verse 11. Peter urges listeners to consider themselves foreigners and exiles in the world. This is a recurring theme, probably hit harder in 1 Peter perhaps than any other book of the New Testament, but it's the biggest book where this is illustrated as a metaphor is the book of Exodus in the Old Testament. But in the New Testament, Paul writes about it in Galatians, Colossians, Ephesians, Philippians. It's there in Hebrews, it's there in Peter, the idea of being aliens, foreigners, strangers, exiles, whatever you want to call it. It's the idea that believers are resident aliens on this planet and our citizenship is in heaven. You push this analogy, and it's interesting because you think about the way you perceive foreign people in your own native culture. So like when somebody who comes from a different part of the world and is here for, let's say, a couple months, like they do what we would call culturally funny things, right? Like they don't understand our idioms. They don't, their diet might be different. Their schedule might be different. Their whatever. And sometimes people even mock others for that. Although I don't think we're more sensitive to that today. But, the basic idea that they're going to look odd by this culture's estimation. There's no getting around that. Like they should look odd. If you really are a citizen of a different location, and you have the value system of that different location, you should look like you don't completely fit here.
Well, and you wouldn't fit in somewhere else.
What do you mean?
Like if you went to a different culture, you wouldn't. You
right.
would look odd.
Correct. I would be the odd one.
Just like we went to this British pub yesterday and you kept saying, "Oi!"
No, not intentional. Mockingly.
Like you were on Ted Lasso.
When in Rome.
What did they have on the menu? Like
I don't know.
Passion.
Well, yeah.
And you were like,
chips and bangers and
yeah.
and a lot of things. I just ordered a big pretzel. Is what I landed on because that was what I was comfortable with.
Most German thing we could find.
Yeah. Well, but it was, you do feel vulnerable. You do look weird and sound weird. You do like those kinds of things. And I think Christians really just have to embrace that. Now, there is such a thing as just being weird personality-wise. That's not exactly what we're embracing. We're saying that when you don't over-assimilate to the value system of a fallen world, it's going to be perceived as a little weird. So there's going to be, along the way, there's all sorts of, and I don't just want to go to the ones that we cherry pick as whatever, but like you're not going to live with your boyfriend, girlfriend before, or have a sexual relationship with your boyfriend, girlfriend before you get married. Like it clearly violates part of God's design for human sexuality and marriage. And it is something that's very common in our culture at this point in time. That's one of the reasons why you also know we're a post-Christian culture, because there was a time when it wasn't, but it's super common. It's the normal today. You're not going to speak the same way and use the exact same kind of languages. You're not going to have the same perceptions of things like finances and what it takes to get ahead in business and in life. And you're not going to find your comfort in the same things or your security in the same things. You're not going to approach major life topics like death the same way. So all of that stuff, you're going to handle it a little bit oddly. And that's what a foreigner does. They just value things a little bit differently. And that's actually super healthy, right? So what do you think is the hardest thing about the exile mentality today? Like, I'm a foreigner in this world. What's the hardest thing to not overly indulge in with this culture?
So we just have so much stuff we're just so blessed. And I think, I don't know, I was saying yesterday, I think about this a lot, like the way I spend my time or money, if it's appropriate, if this really is, just a tiny blip of my entire existence. But I don't know, like the things I spend my money on. So I've been trying to spend more money on other people.
Without keeping like a running tab of it, which is hard, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's right. Like Jesus literally says to spend your money on friends, kind of thing.
Well, the thing is, I could keep just buying myself things, I guess, but I don't think it's wrong to have hobbies or collect things,
Right.
but I don't know. I struggle with how much is too much to spend on something.
Yeah.
It could be anything.
Yeah.
I've always struggled with this my entire life.
Sure.
Like, how much is too much to spend on a sweatshirt?
Right.
Like, I don't know that it really matters.
Yeah, it probably doesn't matter that much. I think less than what your flesh probably wants. So what does my flesh want? What does the world do? And how do I back it off of that? You know, there has to be some margin, what do you call that, a delta? But not delta. Some kind of margin between where the world in general is and my fallen flesh is and what Satan wants me to do and where I'm actually at. That doesn't have to be an extreme of like asceticism where I'm saying that material things are bad, because they're not. But it is, I can't just follow the patterns of this world. And that's why, Paul says in Romans, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind as you understand your heavenly home, the grace of Jesus, etc.
Well, I had a student with me the other day, and she was talking about spending, or what constitutes fine dining. And she said, well, if two people go out and they spend over $100 on a dinner, like, that's still really hard for me to like get over that mental hurdle of like $100 on dinner. And I said, it will surprise you how quickly you will assimilate to spending more money when you have more money, like when you're not a student, and like it happens very quickly and very sneakily.
What is normal?
If you don't know what's going to happen, like we knew this was going to happen. And I think we like have some safeguards in place for that. And if you don't, it's just like a downhill slide.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why, again, I think making major decisions and holding yourself to them, but making those major decisions at times of like great spiritual clarity and soberness. So like periods of like, if you sit down and do a budget for a year, and but you do it after some prayer and maybe some devotion, Bible study for a while, and say like, okay, here's what we're going to do, or here's what I'm going to do. And then you make those decisions, you establish those parameters, and then you abide by those parameters for the rest of the year. I think that's part of why, Paul in 1 Corinthians says, set aside at the beginning of each week what you have decided in your heart to give. And I think what he's saying here is, before everything else, life just hits you and circumstances hit you, prioritize and in a moment of clarity.
Yeah, so we do that, and then I think I've talked about this before, but one of my 2022 goals, I think you were making fun of me for talking about my goals.
I don't think I was. That doesn't sound like me. Go ahead.
Was to not, something like if you don't second guess being generous if the thought comes to you. So this is different from like what we set aside, but sometimes I'll think like, oh, that would be really nice to give that person that, and then I have to do it immediately, because if I don't do it immediately, I literally have to Venmo it or whatever, or buy whatever I'm thinking. Because yes, I'll talk myself out of it quickly. It's
amazing how you can rationalize any behavior. Like any behavior.
And I also think that those thoughts sometimes are prompted by the Holy Spirit, because I know myself, and I don't think nothing about my internal whatever is selfless. It's always thinking about me.
Yeah, I don't think
exactly.
Most humans
so
have
I'm
that.
saying when I have thoughts like that, I think that they're prompted by the Holy Spirit. So it's important to me to act on those.
Yes, I think.
And if I don't do it immediately, I'll talk myself out of it.
I think flexing faith in those moments.
Yes.
To act upon it is the right thing to do. No, I think that's great. Third devotional thought: such good lives. So I actually just preached on this recently. Forgive me for my redundance for anybody who follows along with our sermons online or podcast. But in verse 12, it says, live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. It's an incredible verse. It's Peter's going to follow this up in chapter 3, which I don't want to get into too much, but in verse 15 he says, always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that you have. The assumption is that people will view you as so hopeful that they'll be asking you about it, and you'll need to give a reason. But this one says, live such good lives that people, in some respects, it's going to intimidate them because they're going to feel by comparison like my life isn't as beautiful. But in other respects, other people are going to be drawn to it. And, I mentioned when I was preaching on this, and I just saw this, I don't even remember when, I think it was a couple months ago or a couple years ago, in Jesus' high priestly prayer in John 17. So it's only in John's gospel. It's before his death and resurrection, like that's time frame right before. And he prays about his disciples, and he says, Father, as you have sent me into the world, I am sending them out into the world. And he says, sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. As you have sent me, I am sending you. What he doesn't say, and what kind of hit me, was he doesn't pray for them to become good evangelists. He doesn't he doesn't say sanctify their preaching, make them great, powerful, persuasive, articulate, eloquent preachers. He says sanctify them, and that way when they preach the gospel, which is effective in and of itself, it's not effective by how great of a preacher you are, it's just effective by itself. The Holy Spirit works through it. People are going to be more inclined to listen to it because they've seen it takes hold in their lives. In other words, their lives are so good, their lives are so beautiful and winsome that people want to know what makes them tick. People are convinced more about the gospel by their lives than they are about how well the gospel is taught. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of this mind-blowing concept for me, especially as somebody who preaches regularly, that wait a second, what will actually be more persuasive to people? The people outside the church are much less concerned about what the church has to say, much more concerned about what the church does. I think what they want to find out is, does it work? Is it effective? Does it make you more gentle? Does it make you more kind? Does it make you more respectful? Does it make you more generous? Does it make you less self-absorbed and more other-focused? Mm-hmm. Does it work? And if it works, if it's giving you extraordinary and otherworldly resources for facing the inevitable pain and problems and sicknesses and loss and death of life, if it helps you do all that, does it work? Then I'm interested. Mm-hmm. But I think Christians have sort of missed that point a little bit. He also gives a couple specific examples here that I think are interesting. He goes on in verses 13 to 17 to say, right after this verse, he says, okay, the way you interact with your authorities. Do you have authorities in your life? Because everybody's supposed to have authorities. In fact, we all have earthly governing authorities. God established them for the purpose of helping maintain peace, punishing the wrongdoer, being a blessing and safety to those who do right. Now, it's not that authorities are always perfect. They're not. They're filled with sinful human beings. Just like parents are authorities to kids, even though they're imperfect. Mm-hmm. God gives them anyways. He doesn't say they're perfect. He says it's better to have parents, even flawed parents, than to have no parents for a little child. Same thing is true with adults when it comes to governing authorities. And he says, submit to the emperor, submit to your local governor. These are people like Peter, Paul, and Jesus all say this as guys who eventually get executed by these mm-hmm. emperors, by these governors. And so, what they're saying is submit to your authorities, and the way you interact with those authorities is going to impact your Christian witness to the world. And I think this, to me, is just one of the biggest, so far as I can tell, from a lot of modern, do you hear a lot of modern Christians talk about negatively, disparagingly about governing authorities that are far better than the ones that Jesus, Peter, and Paul faced. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, I think we confuse our First Amendment rights with our not abusing Christian freedom, and we think, well, I'm free to say whatever I want and I won't get tossed in jail, so I talk very negatively mm-hmm. about my authorities, my governing authorities in life, and it's sinful. There's no getting around it. But a lot of Christians talk those ways. So how you navigate your authorities, how you love the family of believers, mm-hmm. Do you look at your Christian faith as, this is just something I do on my own, and it's between me and Jesus? Or do you have a body of people who are counting on you, and you are counting on them, that you are regularly interacting with? Because people see the grace of God by how you interact with other human beings. So are you loving the family of believers really well? And the third thing is, he mentions here, is are you fearing God? And I always think, modern people, almost everybody who believes God is out there, thinks that he is a loving, merciful, borderline permissive God. A lot of people, when you talk to them about God, don't actually perceive his holiness, his capacity for wrath, the potential for the existence of hell. Peter talks about, like, if you have a healthy fear of God, that makes your witness more powerful out in the world. So those three things, I think, are like extraordinarily contemporary for individualistic Christians, for Christians who talk bad about their earthly authorities, and for Christians who talk about God as a loving God, but they don't actually show a healthy sense of the fear and respect of God. Any other thoughts there, or in what ways? Let me ask you this, because that phrase in there says, it doesn't say if the watching world accuses you of doing wrong. It says though they accuse you of doing wrong, meaning it's inevitable. They did it to Jesus. Yeah, they're going to do it to Christians too. What are some ways do you think that Christians obeying God today,
some people
might be accused?
That I know who I know in real life, but I follow on like Instagram, who are very upset about the Roe versus Wade decision. I've seen them posting this quote. It's from a Christian pastor, but it says something like, the Christians who are obsessed with like pro-life should also be like, why aren't you taking care of widows and orphans? And so they keep posting these things, implying that Christians are only concerned with
unborn life,
unborn. And sometimes I want to be like, do you actually know any Christians personally? Like, our church is very concerned with socioeconomic issues, and people in our church are fostering children and adopting orphans and spending money to get kids in Milwaukee higher quality education. And like, do you actually know personally any Christians? Because I think that this subsect of Christians who are so vocal about unborn life, and maybe they are not doing these, I think that's a very small percentage of Christians.
The ones who are like militant,
so I really find it unfair.
Yeah.
And just kind of foolish. Like, you clearly don't know any Christians personally, because I know a ton of Christians who are doing all of these things you're saying that Christians as a whole are not doing.
Yeah, so this is people who are not sensitive about...
Additionally, why do people who are not Christians care so much? Why do they care so much about Christians?
Yeah.
Like, there clearly is something either intriguing, or like, why are you so concerned with what Christians think or do?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that is a history of, I think if you're not a Christian, you perceive yourself to some extent in America as oppressed minority, which may have been, I mean, there might be some merit to that. I think there probably is some merit to that if in years gone by. I don't think that's true necessarily today. And so I think to hold on to something that was probably true 50 years ago, but is not anywhere near to the same extent true today, is, Christians are guilty of this, non-Christians are guilty of this. I once heard a pastor, this has also been really helpful for me, but I think it's helpful for anybody. He said, when you're talking, you have to talk as though somebody, like if you're talking about somebody, you have to talk about them as though they were sitting in the room, and your characterization of them, they would be nodding along to. Be like, yep, that's right. Yep, that's right. Yep, that's right. If you're making a characterization, this is why online conversations are not actual conversations to some extent, because if you're characterizing a Christian and you say Christians don't take care of the widows, orphans, the foreigners, and the poor, and you are sitting with, for instance, a number of people, not all, but a number of people in our church, they'd be like, what are you talking about? Like you clearly don't know. It's not that you don't know any Christians. They might know some Christians that are just very hypocritical.
Or maybe, some people who call themselves Christians.
Yeah.
But...
Yes. So, like, the idea but they're characterizing too many people, like too big of a group, based on their very narrow experience. and they're making a categorization as a public proclamation that a lot of Christians would not nod along to, and it wouldn't be accurate. So it's one of the reasons, it's one of the huge flaws about like public dialogue. It's one of the reasons why, gospel proclamation is probably best done relationally, person to person. I think generally speaking, Christians should just opt out of that sphere. I mentioned I used a quote from Sean Parker, the first president of Facebook, last night, that says he's a conscientious objector to social media. Like, that is extraordinarily telling, that the guy who was on the ground floor of Facebook says, I don't use social media, and he gives a reason. You can look it up. It's an interview on Axios.com from 2017, but he says the intentional hacking, psychological manipulation, that was the basis. He says it was like the basis for what they were trying to accomplish in the early sites, social media sites like Facebook. He's like, it's extraordinarily manipulative. It warps kids' brains. And he calls himself, again, a conscientious objector to it today. And that was like, that was done 10 years after it was released to the public. So it's really interesting to me. But, it also doesn't say such good things. It says live such good lives that the pagans see it. They won't really care what you have to say unless they realize that it makes a difference. So, should we close the prayer? Heavenly Father, thank you again for our time in your word today. Help us understand what it means to be a universal priesthood, that each of us as believers is recognizing that you made the ultimate sacrifice for us. All our sins are gone. We don't have to worry about them anymore. Our place in heaven is secure. We're looking forward to that time, and yet we've got so much opportunity in the days that we have left here on earth. Help us to make the appropriate sacrifices that glorify you and serve others. When we do that, we trust that not only will your name be glorified, but that it is going to be a blessing. You are going to work through those sacrifices. When we pick up our crosses to follow you, your grace will get into the lives of others, and we're looking forward to seeing how that will happen. We pray these things in your name. Amen. Thanks for studying with us today. We'll see you next time for 1 Peter chapter 3.